I spent 18 years of my life living a very specific way, striving for very specific things. And all of a sudden, a year and a half ago, I decided to step away from that. It hasn't been easy, and I don't know any sports person that finds it easy. Most people find it difficult because of that identity piece, even pieces on the very clear, a lot of clarity on what you're trying to achieve, and very focused on how you get there, to stepping into, let's say, the normal world, which isn't necessarily like that at all. But I honestly still have questions of, and still trying to figure out some of those pieces. Is this actually what I see myself doing over the next 10, 15 years? And what I feel very different in sport, I look 4 years ahead and I could plan things out. This shift in approach is nearly, I have to take a step forward, look around, assess the landscape, and take step by step forward, and hopefully figure some of those pieces out.
It is time for another episode of the Cultural Hall, and I'm excited to welcome in Jason Smyth. Now, here's the deal. You know, with the recent announcement of the Ireland Temple, I decided, we could get all sorts of Irish folks in here, but why not get the winningest Paralympian in the entire world to tell us some of his feelings about Ireland getting a temple, and I'm sure we'll talk about other things as well. Welcome, Jason.
Hello. How are you?
I am fantastic. When you first started winning all the medals, we've been around long enough that we thought, oh man, we need to get Jason on the show, and we just didn't. So a huge props right now to Chris West, who reached out to you and said, hey, let's do this. And you said, yeah. And now here we are. I got to ask you, you are the winningest Paralympian that ever existed. Is the internet correct in claiming you that?
I don't know, is the internet correct or not, but we'll go with it, definitely. So maybe just a little bit of background. I competed at 4 Paralympic Games. So Beijing 2008 through Tokyo 2021. Won 6 Paralympic gold medals, won 21 kind of international. So I think in terms of gold medals, there would certainly be other athletes who have won more, just depending on sports. But probably my unique piece is I never lost any major championship through that 18-year period, which I'm not sure of any Paralympian or many sports people doing. So maybe that somewhat answers your question.
So he'll be uncomfortable with it because he's a humble gentleman, but we're in the presence of greatness, everyone. I want to ask you though, because I have been fascinated and this is of my own fault. For a long time, this is what I knew about the Paralympics. There was the Olympics that got a lot of attention, and then the Paralympics that got a little bit of attention, but I never really watched it. I didn't, it just sort of was a thing that existed. And then it may have very well been your winning record that made me go, okay, well, what's going on? And then I find about all these different classifications within Paralympians and all these things. For people that have no idea except that it exists, tell me what you have to do either to be qualified for the Paralympics or not be qualified for the Paralympics.
Absolutely. And just kind of as you're touching on the Paralympics, really, I would say since, and again, so maybe some people have tuned in the past or not, London 2012 was a real shift for the Paralympic movement. And I think which I assume there's plenty of USA listeners, I think the other piece, as it probably continues to build, is LA having the next games coming up. So the momentum around it just kind of continues to build. But you have the Olympics is usually on the start of the summer. The Paralympics often follows 2 or 3 weeks later. And the qualification or classification around Paralympics is really based on certain disabilities or impairments. So that's what, in essence, allows somebody to be eligible. Now, within that, so within the sport, just like the Olympics, there's certain qualification standards. So in 100 meters, which I ran, you have to run a certain time, so it's the best of the best.
Hmm.
Um, but to kind of look at the impairment groups or the disabilities, it's generally broken into a number. You have visually impaired. You'll have those in a wheelchair, so kind of spinal injuries, depending on and with each of these, there's different levels. Maybe I'll talk about that slightly as well.
Hmm.
You have amputees, so leg or arm amputees. Um, and then the other one is kind of more so around a movement. So you'll maybe be aware of cerebral palsy.
Hmm.
So that it impacts certain sides of the body. So there's certain impairments or disabilities you need to have to qualify. And then so it's not that somebody who's visually impaired competes against somebody who's got an arm amputee. You're in essence put into certain groups what your impairment is. So I competed in the T13 100 meters. T was just the sport. So in this instance, it was track.
Okay.
And 13 then was saying my level, I had a visual impairment and I had roughly around 5 to 10% vision. And then anybody in that kind of 5 to 10% vision range was in this category. And then we competed against each other. So to be honest,
Hmm.
the different impairments was rather confusing for me. Never
Yeah.
mind somebody who's tuning in for the first time on it. So hopefully that made sense.
Yeah, definitely. One of the things that I think is fascinating to me, and I think what's drawn me more towards the Paralympics, and now that you say that with London in 2012, that is about the time where I was like, okay. And then you start to pay more attention. And certainly the stories now continue to come out as we work towards Los Angeles. Uh, I find the stories behind the athletes fascinating because, and tell me if you think that this is true or not, that it seems like a lot of these individuals are individuals who were top of their game pre whatever the condition was that made them a Paralympian, some sort of tragic accident, some sort of incident that occurs, and 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 so they're not only top of their game as they were top of their game before or near top of their game before, but now they're overcoming this physical adversity, something that came upon them that they certainly didn't choose or pick or anything like that, but now they're overcoming that as well.
Absolutely, and that's probably two pieces there. So I think from the athlete perspective, you have some people who maybe like myself. So I was diagnosed with this eye condition, and I can talk a little bit more about it in a bit here as well at 7 or 8.
Hmm.
So obviously earlier in stages of life, but you can also have the other, and I know of people, let's say, who have served in the military and then maybe lost a leg for whatever happened. And you have these very athletic individuals that then there's the opportunity to then kind of shift into to Paralympic sports. So you really find um, a bit of a I suppose a variety in how people enter. But I think that's one of the pieces that people are connecting more and more to the Paralympic Games is what you're saying, what people have to overcome in these situations, often against the odds. So again, look at myself. When I say I have 5 to 10% vision, you think of all the things that I can't do and won't be able to do rather than all the things that potentially I can do. And it's that. And I think sometimes the challenge then for people in those situations, society and yourself limits what you feel or think you can achieve. And I think that's one of the great things about the Paralympics. It's trying to change those perceptions. And I think for people watching or connecting in, yes, you mightn't be able to relate to me on what it's like to have a visual impairment, but I think one thing everybody can relate to is challenges.
Yeah.
And the journey in life is constantly filled with challenges. And the success, regardless if it's a visual impairment or something else, is about overcoming it. And I think that's the piece that people look and think, if they can do it, why can't I? And I've seen that myself. I remember at my first Paralympic Games, which was in Beijing 2008. And so for my impairment, I would walk past you and you wouldn't notice any difference. And I can go into the Paralympics and I'll see people that are significantly more impaired than me. And I remember walking past in the food hall. They have these huge big food halls, obviously, when you're having thousands of people come together, and like the Chinese guy was sitting there with no arms, and what do you think when you're thinking of how's this guy going to be able to eat?
Hmm.
And lo and behold, like he's his foot up on the table, he has two chopsticks in between his toes, and he's
Jeez.
eating his dinner and probably making less mess than I am. And I've got my hands to be able to eat. And you look in those situations, and even myself think, what sometimes do I complain about? Look at what some people can achieve and overcome, regardless of what sometimes you think. How can they do that?
Hmm. So I have to ask you, yours a visual impairment that you didn't always have, or I guess maybe you always have, but sort of manifested itself. So you were fully sighted as a young child, 7, 8 years old, and then it sort of went away, deteriorated. Is that what I understand?
Yep, that is correct. So the eye condition I have is called Stargardt's, and as you're saying there, it's a genetic eye condition, um, and it's they often say there's certain periods in your life that it, in essence, can come out or manifest itself. So actually, my granda had the eye condition as well, but it wasn't until he was around the age of 60
Mm.
that it somewhat manifested for him. Therefore, he spent obviously 60 years of his life with normal vision. For me, and around that age of 7 and 8, and kind of to try explain it. So the central part of my eye would be completely blind. So it just nearly for me looking, and the center part just doesn't exist. It's not a color, it's nearly just invisible. And there, for me to see, I tend to then have to use my peripheral vision, the outside of my eye. And the center part of your vision is actually where you get a lot of the focus and be able to see things clearly. So I would see a lot of things around me, and I would see the contrast and the difference in colors, but it would lack detail. It would be all very, very blurry. And a way I've described it before is nearly, and it gets harder to do it nowadays when the camera qualities are good, but when somebody used to take nearly a picture while it's moving, you just see blurry outlines of, and often you see differences because of color rather than detail. So it's a little bit like that.
So take me back then to like 7 or 8 year old Jason, who's like, "Whoa, what's going on? I'm starting to lose a vision." And then like how did you deal with that? I know not a lot of us remember a 7 and 8 year old, but I imagine fairly transformative. So you must remember something around it.
And the reality is, like, so it wasn't this moment that all of a sudden I woke up and my vision had completely dropped. It was more a piece that my parents started to realize. And again, I was probably too young to think any different. So it was just little things like at school where I was sitting, all of a sudden to get up and see what the teacher had put up on the board. I was starting to have to get out of my seat and kind of walk a few steps closer. All of a sudden, instead of being able to sit back on the couch to watch the TV, I was starting to move up closer. Again, I was talking about my central part of my eye being blind. My
Mhm.
my parents were starting to realize that instead of me looking at them or at their eyes, I was starting to look past them. And it was just little pieces like that for them started to, as any parent naturally would do, would think we need to go get our child to get their eyes tested. And then I went to the opticians, got my eyes tested. And from there was sent on to the hospitals to the specialist. So like reflecting back a lot of those periods, I would say I didn't really know. Um, but the periods I do kind of remember are more so around the points where, um, again, I don't remember anything about the day, but I remember being up at seeing the specialist, the ophthalmologist.
Hmm.
Um, and it was at that point that I was told I had this eye disease. And with that is the unknown of how much more it was going to decrease or get worse. And a moment I remember there is my mum, just how upset she was. Um, and I can, and I think all parents can reflect on that. And some, unfortunately, listen, maybe have gone through those situations when you think of your child and you think in those moments at young ages where you're diagnosed with um, a significant condition that will impact the rest of your life. It's always that um, unknown that scares people.
Yeah.
So for me, there was an element of that, realizing this again, 7 or 8. I'm not able to probably look 10, 20 years down the line thinking about it, but I could see the reaction in my mum. Um, and that was definitely one moment. I think as I got a little bit older, which is a very natural thing to do myself, is to ask myself or ask the question and kind of wonder why me? Why at such a young age was I having to deal with such limited vision? Like, what did I do to deserve to be in this situation? And with that came probably quite a number of years of not accepting it.
Mm.
And that really probably moved through my teenage years. And actually, to be fair, sport was the vehicle which allowed me to kind of look beyond that and see it rather than as a challenge, as an incredible opportunity.
I want to take a break right there. We'll come back in the second block of the Cultural Hall.
Imagine running a small business today. It's challenging. Imaging and internet presence is an absolute must. Even with that, you're still a small star in a bright cyber universe. Now, imagine you have someone who understands how to get your site designed for your talents and then easily searched by potential clients. Imagine Lennon Design. Whether it's strictly a website or a whole package of logo creation, advertising media, and promotional materials, Lennon Design is your partner in business. They'll test the boundaries of their imagination to create something unique for you. When you need creative, affordable design, let it be Lennon Design. Call 801-699-3022 or visit lennondesign.com.
Here in the second block of the Cultural Hall, remember you can always send us an email, contact@theculturalhall.com. If you love this episode or have a great recommendation of another great guest and another great episode, you can send those along, contact@theculturalhall.com. So, Jason, I have to wonder, you mentioned that sport was a great way for you to be able to deal with this. You're asking, why did this happen to me? Is God a pretty big part of your life at this point? Is this where you kind of got to know God? Tell me a little bit about the religious intersection of you with this.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up a member of the church. My granda actually was one of the first members in where I lived here in the northwest of Ireland. My mum was a convert. Once she was dating my dad, and my dad went on a mission. She converted kind of through that period. So, for me, I would say God was always part of my life.
Mm-hmm.
But like any person, younger person, there is that journey of you understanding and knowing that for yourself. I think sometimes it's easier in hindsight to look back and realize that I suppose God was and is more there and influencing than you think in those moments. Because in those moments you're very short-sighted, and like now it's easy in reflection to look back and think how incredibly blessed I was to have this eye condition because of everything that it allowed me to be able to do, and just let people see a little bit about me and my beliefs. But in those moments, you nearly would have taken away having a visual impairment, and therefore you missed everything else that was to come. So, I think the gospel was a source of strength, continues to be a source of strength. And I think the other piece is also how it influences my parents.
Mm.
And ultimately, they create the foundations while you are a young or a child and a youth to be able to hopefully deal with those challenges. Um, so yeah, for me it was always there. Maybe I just wasn't able to see it quite in those moments.
Do the experience of where you're like, oh, running and I'm sort of good at it, was it, you mentioned the moment of your mom up at hospital and you get the diagnosis and these different things. And then your mom, emotionally upset. And then the next day, does she come around and put her arm around you and go, but son, one day you'll be a great Paralympian. Tell me how you, I'm sure that's not how it went though.
No, it's never how it goes, is it?
No, but I am curious. I would think that probably running became a distraction, a way that you didn't have to think about it, or a way that you felt like you could pour everything into and you were seeing some success and maybe didn't have to deal with everything that was going on, or were
I th
you?
yeah,
Yeah.
I think sport in general was that for me. So again, as I grew up, I was never, and it seems obvious as well, like my parents didn't treat me any different. I wasn't told you weren't going to play soccer,
Mhm.
um, or you weren't playing tennis just because you couldn't see. So I was involved in everything, doing everything. And I think that's a great, you know, attitude to develop, that I never then eventually maybe looked at it in sport and thought I'm at a disadvantage, and therefore you were always probably having to fight a little bit harder to keep improving. But sport would have been what I loved, and was that kind of where I spent a lot of my time and be able to step away. But I actually didn't get involved in track and field till I was about 15. So like that's significant number of years later. Now, doing any other sport, I was fast
Mhm.
and nobody could catch me. I've had in soccer the ball at my feet, or so I always had a talent around running fast, but not necessarily knowing that turned into running fast in terms of being a track athlete. And it was actually a school teacher who got me involved in track and field. She seen the potential, and she encouraged me to go to a local club, and from there was kind of, again, we talk about God's hand, and sometimes along the way, like that school teacher crossed my path. I went down to the track club. I met on the other side of the track that night was the guy who coached me for a huge amount of my career, and probably was the most influential person in terms of me getting to the successes I did in terms of a track coaching, that end of the sport. So a lot of these things kind of, yes, you make your choices, but it also kind of leads to different people crossing your paths that are very influential. And it probably wasn't till I was late teens that I started to realize, oh, I'm actually, so I competed or qualified to compete for Northern Ireland at an under 18 Commonwealth Games, which was in Australia. And I was still at school, and it was like, at this stage, you're getting somebody's paying for you to go to a free trip to Australia
Yeah.
to compete. It was probably the moment, and getting out of school for a week or two, I was thinking, well, maybe there is something here that I could potentially go on and do. Um, but again, I wouldn't have grown up watching much of the Olympics. I would have known nothing about the Paralympics if I was completely honest.
Mhm.
Um, and like things kind of just started to happen and move quite fast. But again, in a sporting terms, fairly late on, for where I first entered into track.
How much disadvantage is there by not being able to see? Because you're still able to run just as fast as possible, and so long as you kind of stay in a lane, I suppose that some people would say that maybe it's unfair, or it's not necessarily like a disability or anything like that, because it's not anything with the running. Talk to me about that. Is there a difference, do you suppose?
Well, again, it's very hard to quantify what the difference
Sure.
is because I don't know what it's like to have full vision to know how it impacts me differently.
Sure.
But the reality is, having limited vision, yes, it might not impact when we look at other disabilities or impairments, a muscle.
Mm-hmm.
But when you think of if you have 5 to 10% vision, or even just, which is not quite the same, but if you completely close your eyes, it impacts
Yeah.
absolutely everything you do.
Yeah.
How you're going to run, how you're going to see, let's say even on around competing, you'll often see the visually impaired blind athletes struggle to dip at the line because yet you often can't see the line clearly. So it impacts so many things of what you do on a day-to-day basis. I even think sometimes the way the water sits on the track and the glare,
Hmm.
there's huge amount of how it impacts. What does that turn into in terms of how much more it impacts me than somebody that's fully sighted? I honestly can't answer, but for me, I never looked at it like that, and I looked at it as there's absolutely no reason why, if you can see fully, can run fast. Well, why can't I run fast? And that was kind of my attitude on everything. I never looked at it and thought, um, just because you could see better, you could do something better than I could. And I think that's really what then gave me the drive to continue trying to improve. And again, I lived in the States for a number of years out in Florida. Um, I lived and trained there with some of the top Olympic athletes in the world at the time. Tyson Gay was he's the American record holder in the 100 meters at 9.69.
Hmm.
So like I was in environments and put myself in places that everybody was just better than me. And it's kind of that sink or swim moment. And it's those moments that you kind of really can drive on to push to nearly break through the ceiling of what you think your limit is,
Mm-hmm.
which was really what kind of set up a lot of the sustained success over those 18 years.
Do you think that it's something that was just sort of innate within you? Do you think it's the upbringing that your parents gave you saying, no, you're going to go do all the things? Do you think that it was God given? Because not everyone does that. Not everyone goes and says, listen, I'm just going to go and I'm going to go. And now I'm training among the elite athletes. And just because you have this and doesn't mean I can't do this. Where do you think that comes from?
I think, to be honest, there's not one simple answer. I think lots of those different elements play a part. So I think, for example, family, being and I was in a very secure, stable family situation,
Mm-hmm.
just gives me a bit more of a solid foundation to then build on. I met a coach that had this drive to put me in environments that I was going to push beyond where I thought. So you're also learn as a young person, you're learning from the people you're around. And
Mm-hmm.
we hear it all the time. Those around you have a massive influence on who you are or what you become. So there's the influence of others is massive. But I think in terms of who we all are and let's say the gospel and um, we all have this potential, I think, to be far greater or better than we are.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's us that doubts ourselves and puts limits and caps on that potential. Um, but I certainly feel the gospel and the things that I know to be true and my faith has also been a part that adds to that and helps me deal with those situations. So I think we all have those potentials, but there's an influence by others and circumstances and situations that I think can influence our belief that we
Has
can do it or can't.
has there been a moment that you have found where you're like, I'm grateful that this is your situation? I mean, it's because it sounds to me like you have tremendous gratitude, and certainly you shared that you would not have been able to have some of the experiences that you've had and be able to do the things that you've done. But I think for someone to be able to say that they are grateful, they have gratitude for something like this. Do you remember a moment where you're like, yes, this is me. I get you, God. We are on the
Yeah,
same page.
yeah,
Let's go.
yeah. I can't look back and tell you a one moment, but I know it was in through this journey in sport.
Hmm.
And that's the real shift. And again, obviously I can appreciate it going from a situation where you're asking why me, and that's the complete opposite, to go to a situation where now I am completely grateful and I wouldn't change anything.
Hmm.
And I see it, what everybody else probably sees as the biggest weakness, I see it's turned into my greatest strength.
Yeah.
Um, I can't tell you where that one moment was, but it was through this journey in sport. Probably, it's been before the end of my career. So I competed, or retired from competing, March 2023. So it might have been mid-career that it just, you look in those moments and you think, let's say there is a reason why, or there is a greater plan, or things were able to move in a way that actually was far beyond what I was able to imagine was going to happen. Yes, you're making the choices along the way
No.
in those moments. But yeah, like I feel very fortunate as I look back on a very successful career to have had the opportunity that most people will never have. And it's through those experiences. And I've had experiences through my sporting, and I'll even maybe just share around, like, Tokyo was my last Paralympic Games and was probably the greatest moment through all of my sporting career. Now, I won that race in Tokyo by 100th of a second. So we're
Gee.
talking a centimeter. But it was all on this basis. I had the most difficult year of my career leading into it. So as people remember, it was back in the times with COVID. The
Hmm.
games was pushed or postponed a year because of COVID. So it was originally supposed to be in 2020, was changed to 2021. And as an athlete, you're all your preparation, you're looking at this 4 year cycle. So you have everything mapped out in this 4 year cycle. And 2020, I was exactly where I needed to be. Then COVID came. Um, I ended up picking up a significant back injury. And again, as an athlete, you're so finely tuned, and we're constantly getting support, physio, massage, and everything around the athlete to kind of maximize your performance. And I went, again, with COVID, a number of months with getting no support, which led to this injury. But I couldn't bend down and touch my knees at times.
Jeez.
Like, it was disc issues, and I kind of let things settle. Then they came back, so we were about 9 months out from the games, and I was seriously thinking, again, I was 33 at the time. So you're also at the back of your mind, is this coming towards the end of my career? Doubts, uncertainties. Was I going to make the games? Was I going to be at the level to really compete? I was the champion, never lost.
Hmm.
We got to the games. There was an athlete who had actually come from nowhere and run quicker than me. So you had all this pressure building around. But I suppose probably as a result of how that final went, like, I felt in those moments I relied more and more on my faith and trying to control the things that I could control. And I found an ability to, in that moment, find something that I wasn't able to find anywhere else in my career. And it just was, again, the team around me, we looked at that moment and thought, how on earth did that just happen
Hmm.
the way it did? And I have no doubt that influence, not that I was going to beat somebody else, but the influence was, how can I maximize my potential? And that for me was a real powerful moment in terms of me believing in what I can achieve regardless of the challenges that we face.
Yeah, that's pretty powerful. I want to take another quick break. When we come back in the third block, there are 3 questions that we ask everyone who steps into the cultural hall. I'll ask those of you, plus some other things as well. We'll come back and do that in the third block. BestDJinUtah.com is the website. That is where you go if you would like me to come and DJ your event. Now, will I do a family reunion where you all wear the same t-shirts? You bet I will. Will I travel to wherever you're at? Am I reasonable as far as what I cost? Yes. Do I bring a good time? Yeah, all the things. Listen, Best DJ in Utah, it's my company. It's a thing I do that allows me to be able to have the time to do the cultural hall. So if someone's getting married, you think, man, they need a great DJ. You're throwing a party, whether it's a 50th or 60th or 40th or 20th or whatever the party is. I've done them all and would love to be able to do that. An anniversary party, certainly done those. I did a baptism in 2023. Yeah, we did a big dance party at a baptism. Spoiler, not a Mormon baptism, but it was fun nonetheless. BestDJinUtah.com is a website. I will get back to you within 24 hours with a quote. Come on now. BestDJinUtah.com. Here in the third block of the Cultural Hall, remember you can become a Patreon saint of the Cultural Hall. You go to patreon.com/the Cultural Hall, whereas for as little as $5 a month, you get to see the videos of these great episodes, and you get to be a part of the secret and not sacred Facebook group where all the Patreon saints are hanging out. We would love it if you would do that. Patreon.com/the Cultural Hall. So I have to ask you, Jason, because in being able to talk with people who were athletes, business owners, etc., and then they sort of say, now I'm done with that. I'm going to do something else. So much of your identity is tied up in sport and competing at an elite international level. What has it been like since you've said, done? I'm not doing that anymore.
Yeah, it's been good and bad, to be honest. As you say there, like I spent 18 years of my life living a very specific way, striving for very specific things.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, a year and a half ago, I decided to step away from that. It hasn't been easy, and I don't know any sports person that finds it easy. Most people find it difficult because of that identity piece, even pieces on the very a lot of clarity on what you're trying to achieve and very focused on how you get there, to stepping into, let's say, the normal world, which isn't necessarily like that at all. Now I currently work within the sporting organization Paralympics Ireland as a strategy manager. So we're doing a lot of work currently around shaping where the organization is looking to go over the next 10 years. So even though I'm not competing, I'm still somewhat in the wider space, not directly connected to athletes, but I was still, for example, out at the games there in Paris. But I honestly still have questions of, and still trying to figure out some of those pieces. Is this actually what I see myself doing over the next 10, 15 years? And what I feel very different in sport, I looked 4 years ahead and I could plan things out. Mm-hmm. This shift in approach is nearly, I have to take a step forward, look around, assess the landscape, and take step by step forward and hopefully figure some of those pieces out. But looking back at sport again, I learned a lot of important lessons, and a lot of the skills you develop to be successful in sport are very transferable. It's just trying to figure out exactly where it is I would like to apply them. So yeah, I'm still trying to figure out what I'm going to do when I get older.
Other questions that I just have, and maybe if at any time you're like too personal, I don't want to answer that. You're married.
Yep.
How did anything of this play into any of that? Was she chasing down Olympians and she's like, ooh, that guy, I like that guy?
No, my wife's actually from out there in Utah.
Okay.
So I have some family. My dad, so my two uncles live out there, married Americans as well. A long story short, I was coming out to visit them. Elise, my wife, had a plan to come to Ireland with her friend to visit. So we were kind of originally, when I went out to Utah, set up on a date, just because Elise is going over to Ireland in a number of months' time. She was going to stay at my house while they were traveling around. So it was kind of go out, do something with Jason, so at least you'll know him when you get there. And that's actually kind of how that started. And then I said I lived out in Florida for a while, and we did long distance for a number of years. So no, my wife wasn't into sport. Um, wouldn't have known anything about me or my sporting journey other than my uncle connected us. So yeah, we got married out there in the Salt Lake Temple. We moved to Florida. We moved into London for a few years, and then we now live in Ireland and have two girls, one age 9 in a couple of days, and the other one 6. So yeah.
A question about that then. Uh, I know that with some folks, they have concern, worry about having kids, especially with something that is genetic. Was that ever a concern for you?
No, not at all. Um, and again, we don't quite know what the situation will or won't be with my girls. But even looking around my wider family, my aunties, uncles, my parents, my brothers, sisters, cousins, currently nobody has the eye condition. Now, that doesn't mean it can't manifest at some later stage, as we discussed. But no, it had no bearing on um my kids, because I don't see it be a reason why it should stop you in life and still excelling in life. So um
Yeah, I agree. I
oh,
worry about a lot of things though that shouldn't that shouldn't worry me or impact me. I just wondered if it was ever a thought, and I can tell that you are someone that has just said, "This is life. Let's embrace it." I started this episode joking around about it, but I am curious. A temple in Ireland. What does that mean for you?
people here are extremely excited. So it's obviously going to be somewhere around Dublin. Not sure what the time frame till we actually said 5, 10 years time, but it's something here in Ireland we've been talking about, hoping for, always waiting in conference to hear the names of temples, and one day maybe we'll hear Ireland. So it's incredible that we have, and again, for context, for people potentially listening to, like, we've got to then fly currently over to England, um which again is only an hour away on a flight, but it's just the hassle for people to actually go to the temple and spend a number of days there, which really now just will open up the ease for people to go more frequently, and have greater access to temple. So it's exciting here for all of us.
Did you cry? Be honest.
I'm not a crying type, so no.
Okay. Okay. And then you mentioned, and obviously anywhere that gets a temple, people are excited about it for the most part, it seems. What is the church like there in Ireland? It seems to me, I think Irish, and I think Catholic is the next word after I think Irish. And so it seems to me that that would be an extremely tight-knit LDS community in Ireland.
Yeah, so Ireland wouldn't, I don't know what the exact numbers are active, and I think we have either, I think it might be 2 stakes in Ireland and maybe one district. So it's the numbers aren't significant. So I would say our ward is probably one of the biggest wards, I would say, in all of Ireland, and we maybe have 150 people
Mm.
coming out to church. Now, some of the smaller wards, or even where I would have grown up, might have 70, 80. So it's probably generally in those kind of ranges. I don't know, do we maybe have 1,000 maybe up to 2,000 max of active members, so fairly small.
But a tremendous blessing to not have to, like, you could actually just go to the temple and make a night or a weekend of it, as opposed to having to go to the airport, checking the things, taking the time, getting
Absolutely.
the
Like,
reservation, all the things.
so we're going to the temple in a couple of weeks here. So I'm actually the elders quorum president in my ward, and we're going on an elders quorum trip. And yeah, we're exactly that. We're going on a Friday. People have got to take the Friday off work to then fly over to England to go Friday to then come back later on Saturday. So it's obviously financially it's for people time off work, time away from family. So it is and can be difficult. So it's going to be a great blessing that what we'll probably have to do is travel an hour 30 down the road, and we'll have no excuse to not be there more frequently.
I do like the idea of an elders quorum trip to the temple, though. That's something that here in Utah we would never have to do. And unfortunately, I think that the bonding, the experiences that would come from, going overnight to go somewhere, it will be different. There will be some loss within that, I would imagine. I've never spent any amount of time with any of my elders quorum, let alone go on a flight, let alone go into the temple with them, etc. So there is an exchange within all that.
You're absolutely right. There's pros and the cons. And the shift might be for us is that we still go on elders quorums trips to the temple. That's just an hour 30 down the road. But you're right. It's spending time with people that you build connections. And if it's a drive down the road, drive down back up, it's not the same as actually being away for a day or two with people. And I think, yeah, it's probably not a piece we've thought about, because forever that's exactly what we've had to do. Even in the past, when flights were less frequent or cost more, that people would have had to get buses and go across in the boat and spend a number of days and actually really connect with the people in the ward. So yeah, it is probably a piece that will may get missed a little.
Another curious thing, kind of harkening back to something that you said earlier on, is you said that you've had opportunities to share your faith through your sport. Can you maybe share with me one experience that you had, whether introducing people to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or someone that came alongside and asked questions, or some sort of like missionary experience that has occurred through your sport and your membership in the church?
Yeah, so I think probably the thing for me, the situation I've been in is being in the public eye. And with that, people want to know and understand more about me. So I again, I don't have experience where specifically I know of people who have gone and eventually been baptized, but what I do know around is, let's say, athletes. I know plenty of athletes who have asked me and wanted to understand my faith, what I believe. I've done numerous interviews, some of the biggest TV shows here in Ireland, asking those specific questions around my faith. And with that just is somewhat letting the general public understand a little bit more about what the gospel is, or what the Church of Jesus Christ is, rather than sometimes the misinformation out there. And I think, that's the opportunity, is to stand and be an example of hopefully good, and represent that in my actions and what I do. And it's actually not even just been in sport. And again, I was on the Irish version of Dancing with the Stars earlier this year, and even though I can't dance very well, I ended up winning that. But and that becomes a public vote, and people are voting for you, and off the back of that, people are asking then questions and wanting to understand who you are and what you believe. And I think that's probably the powerful. It's one of the things actually I remember when I was young. Obviously the expectation of to go on a mission. And I wasn't able to, with obviously my limited vision, but I now look back and think those kind of similar opportunities to share the gospel and be a light is actually just come in a very, very different way.
Well, and it speaks tremendous amounts about your character, that people can see, hey, there is something about Jason, something about the way that he carries himself, the way that he respects faith and looks at challenges and looks at the bigger thing. I think that it's a far greater example maybe than even that you realize now. And maybe people can't quite put their finger on it going, oh, that's a believer, or that's a Christian person, anything like that. They can just sense that there's something different about who you are and about how you carry yourself. It's come to the time that we ask everyone the same 3 questions that step into the Cultural Hall. You answered one of them already just in our conversation. That question is do you have a calling right now? And if so, what is it? Elders Quorum President. So the second question is if you could pick a calling for yourself, either one that exists or make one up, what would you pick?
Oh, what's one that doesn't feel like I have to do too much work? That's the challenge, isn't it? Is we like to do something that doesn't require much work, but actually where we grow and develop is the ones that require the most work. Mm-hmm. I think what I would like or pick to do, I think, to be honest, something around the youth I just think the ability to influence the youth is one that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Don't know exactly what that is, but something around there.
A mentor. There you go. The church mentor for the youth. Something like that. The last question we ask everyone, we ask you to interpret it however you would like. But the question is, what is your favorite part of your faith?
My favorite part of my faith, I would say purpose and direction. So I just look at life. And again, as I touched on this earlier around my sporting career and stepping away and feeling like I'd lost some of that, I've become more and more aware of just my faith and the gospel, how much purpose and direction that it gives me in my life. And then because of that, who I am and try to become.
It's an amazing journey that you've been on thus far. And like you mentioned, you're not even halfway done. It's fun to see what you're going to do when you grow up. And I hope that if you
no pressure.
Yeah. As you land into something else, maybe we'll have you come back into the Cultural Hall and be able to ask you more about that. Jason Smyth, we hope that this episode has nourished and strengthened your body, that if you're not healthy enough to listen this week, that you'll be healthy enough to listen next week, and that when the time comes, you will be able to travel home in safety. In the meantime, Chris at Alpine Lakes Travel, Rick McGee, Debbie Wanless, Chocolate Cake Bites Podcast, and the Tiger, with a U, will be saving a seat for you on the back row of the Cultural Hall.
Save me a seat, it's sure to be neat on the back row. We really gotta go on the Cultural Hall show.